saw her yesterday.
Well, good morning. We're going to start with the next session. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's Las Díaz Alejandro Lecture by Carlos Beck. Las Díaz Alejandro Prize has been designed to honor the memory and contribution of Carlos Díaz Alejandro and to encourage high-quality research on economic issues relevant to Latin America. Carlos Díaz Alejandro is known to many of us here, but perhaps to some of the younger generation, not so much. So let me talk a little bit about him. Carlos Díaz Alejandro was a Cuban researcher of the history of Latin American economies, and his memory is a dear example for Latin American economists, particularly in academia. Let me read from Lisa Kiana's biography of Díaz Alejandro a few words. Carlos was one of the few tenured Latino professors at major American economics universities in the 60s and 70s. He was the youngest ever full professor in the Yale economics department when he was appointed at such at age 32. Throughout the following 15 years of his career, he became known both for his insightful analysis of Latin American economies and his outspoken advocacy for human rights and improved US-Cuban relations. Díaz Alejandro's research focused on the Argentinian and Colombian economies, covering numerous aspects of their development. His best-known papers researched financial crisis in Latin America in the 1930s and identified issues that many of us feel related to today, such as moral hazard, the idea now known as too big to fail, and dollar-denominated debt as major causes of such crisis. So I'm now closing the quotes. The Díaz Alejandro Prize has been previously awarded to very important economists dear to many of us. So let me read. In 1998, Edmar Bacha. In 2000, Arnold Harberger. In 2002, Rudy Dernbusch. In 2006, Guillermo Calvo. In 2008, Jere Berman. In 2010, Hugo Hoppenheim. 2012, Sebastian Edwards. In 2014, Carmen Reinhardt. In 2016, our very own Horacio Atanasio here. In 2018, Jim Robinson. And now today, we're going to be listening to Carlos Beck's lecture, our most recent awardee. Carlos Beck is the Fred H. Sanderson Professor of International Economics at Johns Hopkins University. He was recently also the World Bank Chief Economist for Latin America and the Caribbean, and has been a co-editor of the Journal of International Economics and the Journal of Development Economics, leading journals in their respective fields, and has also been the chief editor of Economía, Las Díaz journal. Carlos has published extensively in leading academic journals on monetary and fiscal policy in developing and emerging economies, and has been awarded by our executive committee and nominating committee the Carlos Díaz Alejandro Prize, precisely for his contributions on these two fields. So let's welcome Carlos with an applause, and Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Marcela, such a nice introduction, and also the words about uh, about Carlos Diaz. Alejandro, it is truly a great pleasure and a great honor to be here. I mean, I feel very happy, obviously, to have had a great honor to be the recipient of this important prize. And I have to say that even though I never had the fortune of meeting Carlos personally, we all know that through his writings, his concern, and his love for our region, he has had a tremendous influence on his contemporaneous and all his children, so to speak. And I want to feel that even though I did not have the pleasure of meeting through two very good close, very close friends of mine. One is Guillermo Calvo, who many of you know was a colleague of Carlos, and through and through Andres Velasco, uh, also a very close friend of mine, who was actually a student of Carlos. So I have to say that over the years, particularly through, as I said, through Guillermo and through Andres, I have heard many personal anecdotes about the insights and about the intelligence and kindness of Carlos. So even though I never met through both Calvo and Velasco, I feel that I have met him a little bit, and I have always feel very inspired by his work. So let me close this thing. Okay. So now going to the lecture itself, I mean the title that I chose was Fiscal uh, procyclicality in emerging markets, evidence and theory. And I thought that this would be a very representative topic. I mean, since the award is given for a body of work, I mean, if I had had the chance to work and help uh, building a body of work has been this topic on fiscal policy procyclicality. This is a topic that I have literally been working on for more than for more than to any years with various superb authors that I will be naming as I as I go along. So I thought it would be a good opportunity to look back to see what we know, to see how do we know it, to see what is it what we don't know, and what is coming next for a topic that to me from a macro fiscal point of view is perhaps the most challenging issue. So before I go to this, I want to, since this is Dr. Díaz Alejandro, and he was such a perceptive, I mean, Díaz Alejandro, I mean, although he didn't wrote too much about this, I mean, he certainly did mention this in his very famous this dissertation on the essays of Argentinian economic history. So, and here I quote, he already said in 1930 that the fiscal authorities that had taken charge, their purpose had been to cut the fiscal deficit inherited from the previous administration, which is a little bit what also happened in the US. And of course, he was very critical of that. Then he talks of the 1934 plan that in the middle of the Great Depression called for a very tight reduction in fiscal expenditure, and also on a big increase in taxes. And then he also linked this on the UK and the US, criticizing them for tight fiscal policy in the midst of the big Great Depression. And this is all coming from his dissertation. So just to summarize, Díaz Alejandro, given very, very early on, was very much aware of what we would call today the very bad effects of pursuing fiscal procyclicality. That simply means that you have a contractionary fiscal policy in bad times. So he was kind of ahead of his time in some sense. Okay, so now to go to the lecture itself, I'm planning to organize the lecture around two key questions. The first is how is fiscal policy conducted over the business cycle. We'll conclude that the fiscal policy is going to be procyclical in developing countries, and then of course we want to understand why, because this is a really bad policy, and there are many papers that have computed the fair cost of pursuing fiscal procyclicality, and that is of course bad. And then the third question that we want to ask is, are there countries that have graduated? And by graduated, we mean countries like the poster boy is the case of Chile, that has been able to switch from procyclical policy to countercyclical policy. I mean, contrary to what people believe, I mean, this process of cyclicality is not a static process, but quite to the contrary. This is a process that evolves over time, and so some countries are able to switch to countercyclical policies, and some others are not. And last, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about what all that we have learned means for fiscal rule, which is the new phase of all this literature that has been there, as I said, for over 20 years or so. So here I wanna briefly say two things, because this is still, even after 20 years, this is a source of many confusion and many mistakes. So the key here briefly is that we want to base the behavior of fiscal policy based on policy instruments. Meaning, what is that the fiscal authority control? And as we know, in principle, the fiscal authority controls, of course, government spending, and controls tax rate. And here the key word is tax rate, as opposed to tax revenues. There are still papers in the literature which use tax revenues. That makes no sense, because the tax base is extremely elastic to the business cycle. So, you know, the policy outcome doesn't tell you anything about what the fiscal authority itself is trying to do. And many other papers have tried to address this by cyclically add cyclically add adjusting tax rate, but we have shown in some work that that is cyclically adjusting tax revenues doesn't do the trick. So always focus for those who continue to work on this or have worked on this on the policy instrument. Okay, so that's a very important point, and this is just the definition that we'll use. A procyclical fiscal policy is a fiscal policy that is expansionary in good times and a cyclical fiscal policy has basically in no correlation with the business cycle, and then we have the counter-cyclical fiscal policy and that is how we are going to characterize the stance of a fiscal policy. So I'm very quickly here because this is also a very common mistake, is that people see, for instance, and this I call the perils of using outcomes instead of instrument, is that, I mean, even in the best of institutions, and I'll show you, an very telling example in a minute, I mean, professional economists see primary surplus and conclude from that fiscal policy has been countercyclical. And this, of course, is not necessarily true because the change in the tax base is so big that you may be spending a lot in good times, meaning that you are procyclical, but because the tax base has increased so much, what you see is a fiscal surplus. But you cannot say that your fiscal policy is countercyclical. And the same is true when you have a primary deficit. There are many people, including World Bank and IMF, that they see a primary deficit in bad times, and they say this is great because it means that we are doing countercyclical fiscal policy. Wrong, because you could be tighten up a fiscal policy so much that it is because of the fall in the tax base that you see a big primary deficit, and it is not because you are actually pursuing a countercyclical fiscal policy. So this, many people get confused or don't pay enough attention, that has a very important implication for macro policy. And just to show, and I tried to fight this in the bank when I was chief economist. So very quickly, this is this is an official report on Peru from 2017, and here here the Peruvian team concluded that because when the output gap is positive, you have a positive fiscal balance. That implies that Peru was countercyclical, but that is wrong for what we just said. And if you do the calculation as you should, like here, you can see that Peru, for all this period, was actually very pro-cyclical. So this can happen to the best of us. So the practical implication is that one should not use under any circumstances actual fiscal balances to infer the cyclical stand of fiscal policy. Okay, so this is a plot that probably many of you are familiar or have seen some version. This is a plot that we put in the table 20 years ago with my very good friends Graciela Kaminsky and Carmen Rangel. I call it, and other people also, the plot de Peñarol, because being from Uruguay, I mean, it is obvious that the best it is obvious that the best soccer team in the world is Peñarol. I mean, I should have said that I am from Uruguay, of course, and Peñarol is the best team in Uruguay and one of the best in the world, and the colors of the jersey of Peñarol is yellow and black. Okay, so that is why I call this the plot de Peñarol. This is a plot that over 20 years has been replicated, re-replicated with different samples, with different methodologies and so forth. We always find the same thing. So very quickly here, the yellow bars are developing countries, the black bar are OECD countries. If you the size of the bar is the correlation between the cyclical component of public spending and output. So obviously all these countries here are pro-cyclical because they are correlation coefficient is positive, and so this is based on 123 countries, and I think that more than 85 countries of the developing countries are procyclical, and this is of course one of these instances in which a picture is truly worth a thousand words, because you can see the massive yellow mass, indicating that almost all developing countries are procyclical, and then this black mass that is indicating that the OECD are countercyclical. And here very quickly I put the little flags of Greece and Portugal, and you can guess why, because since the global financial crisis, as many of you know, Portugal and Greece have been behaving more like emerging countries than OECD countries. And then I plotted Chile because I'll talk about Chile a little bit more as an example of graduation, because Chile has been able to switch from procyclicality to counter cyclicality. So very quickly, because time is scarce, obviously. So this is for the tax side, right? I would say that in 99% of this kind of empirical literature has been done only on the public spending side, just because it is very hard. I mean, you cannot go to IFS and to get data on tax rates. So with my dear co-author Guillermo Bulletin, we put to together a data set on VAT, personal corporate tax, and personal income tax, and we basically get the same pictures. Typically developing countries are procyclical also on the taxation side, whereas OECD countries, as you can see here, for a tax index, these three taxes that I just mentioned, for the case of industrial countries, the coefficient is not significantly different from zero, so we can call this a cyclical tax policy for OECD countries. But if you look at the developing countries, it is very strongly procyclical. And I mean, I don't have time to show you, but also with Guillermo Bulletin, we had established that perhaps not surprisingly, the more procyclical you are on the spending side, the more procyclical you also are on the tax on the tax is section is side. Okay, so now I want to take a small deviation because this to me is one of the most fascinating things, and it is gonna have a lot to do with fiscal rule, and it is gonna have a lot to do as to why some people like I mean, DIMF puts together fiscal rule that have nothing to do. So I mean, why do they keep in that? I don't have a clue. I would need to talk to my friend Victor Gaspar or something. Because what is this? So this is procyclicality at the sub-national level for Argentina. As many of you know, Argentina has 23 provinces plus the black one, that is the federal government. The mean correlation between the cyclical components of a provincial GDP and also provincial public spending is 0.46, right? And as you can see, all the 23 provinces plus the federal government are all very highly procyclical. I mean, 0.46 is very high. If you are used to the kind of numbers that people get. So, okay, so keep it. And this is in some sense what we would expect from Argentina. Because I mean, Argentina has always been one of the most procyclical fiscal public spending in the Cold War. So this is what you would spend. So you could ask, okay, I mean, it is nice to see the chart, but why waste time on this? And here is why it is so good to look at, and this is not wasted time, because these are again procyclical fiscal policy at the sub-national level for the US. And if I hadn't told you which one is which, you meaning is this the US, is this Argentina, is the one before the US and Argentina, I mean, you would not have been able to tell me because the picture looks the same. I mean, as a matter of fact, the mean correlation of 0.46 is now the mean correlation of 0.43. All all if 50 states with except of two are very highly procyclical. And we'll talk about that. But this has to do because for an accident, dental history that happened at the end of the 19th century due to banking crisis. Most states on the Union took the decision of imposing a balanced budget balance, not a not a structural balance budget, a balance budget, but an actual balance budget. And if you think for a second, and this is a question that I ask my students, and I ask them, I mean, suppose that your goal was to maximize the procyclicality. I mean, what is your answer? And the students that have understood immediately say, well, the way to maximize a procyclical policy is to have a balance budget rule. Okay, so very important. But the fund, for instance, in its database, they put in the same category the structural fiscal balance, which is what Chile has used, and that is perfectly fine. But to put in the same category the structural together with the actual balance rule makes no sense. Okay, so I'm gonna hurry up here. So the question here is, why is fiscal policy? I'll be happy to refer you to the papers that are behind this, but obviously, if you have a complete market model a la Lucas Tokay, all is good, because you can replicate the first best, which is an cyclical fiscal policy. The other extreme, it is always nice to have this extreme, this other extreme, and then the case in between. So, of course, if you are in financial autarky, the fiscal authority has no choice but to be procyclical, because you cannot smooth from the rest of the world. So what you are forced to do is that in bad times you have no choice but to be procyclical, meaning that you have to increase the tax rate, and of course you have to increase the domestic real interest rate, right? So this is what happened if you have financial autarky. So this is kind of in the spirit of Lucas talk Ramsey problem if they were doing it under incomplete markets. I mean, as you know, the tough thing about writing down a, um, a Ramsey optimal fiscal policy is the case of incomplete markets. So with some of my co-authors, we have attacked this. This is still a work in progress because, as we know from yeah, Gary and is Sargent and others, it is very tough to solve the Ramsey problem for incomplete markets. But here what we have been able to establish is that we can show formally, and not with the RBC, I mean with a theorem that that under incomplete markets risk free bond public spending is always procyclical. So I mean whatever assumption you make, government spending is going to be procyclical. The new theoretical result that we are still working on is that it would be wrong to say that incomplete markets also also imply that the tax rates are gonna be procyclical as it has been claimed. No, the answer, and we show that, is that the tax rates are gonna be procyclical only if the ratio of private consumption to public consumption moves positively with the business cycle. And the intuition is that because consumption is fluctuating much more, your tax base is very high, and therefore you should and can afford to reduce tax rates. Okay, so this is this is I mean, I think a novel finding that needs to be looked more. Okay, so let me very briefly. I mean, I am not even going to talk about them. I am gonna just to mention them. So again, the question is why has fiscal policy been pro-cyclical in the developing countries? And there are, I mean, this has spawned like a huge literature. There must be at least 80 or 100 papers offering some sort of political economy. Here, let me just mention perhaps the best known paper, that is the paper by Tornell and Lane, that they talk about this acid effect, which is basically the idea of fishing from a common pool, and obviously don't because you don't internalize the fact that a fish that you fish is one less fish. So the society as a whole tend to spend too much, right? So that is an explanation. Then also some work that we did with Talvi, inspired by Cavallo. For those of you who follow Argentina economic history, and I'm sure that Díaz Alejandro would have had a lot to say about that. Cavallo did not like to accumulate a, a primary surplus in the treasury, because he felt that it would be too very complicated to say no to all the political precious group that would want to claim a piece of the pie.
Carlos,
Yes.
just to let you know that we have 10 minutes to the end of the session.
Okay, sure. Thank you. So, and then this Lesina story, that it is a common story in some kind of political economy. That is the idea of starving the beast by making sure, in terms of the medium voter, that the public authorities send more money to the private sector, and also and also reduce taxes. So very quickly, and this I'm going to fly over this. I'll be happy to send you the paper if you're interested. This is work that, because I am on a sabbatical year, I mean, I have doing consulting at the bank, and this is a test of the theory of fiscal procyclicality, right? So the depending variable is the correlation, and then we have the financial openings, and this and then to capture political economy, political economy variables, we include corruption control, political constraint, and GDP volatility that I don't have time to talk about it, but it basically the higher is the GDP volatility, the theoretical model is telling you that the more procyclical fiscal policy is gonna be. Okay, since given my time constraint, this I'm just going to show you because again I think that the visual expression. So this is the sample that I showed you at the beginning, but we cut it before the year 2000 and after the year 2000, and you can see how this big yellow mass before the year 2000 that is very similar to the whole plot that I'll show you that that I showed you. So now this yellow mass has has shrunk quite a bit, and if you compute what we call, and this is based on this paper, that we have from here to here 22%, which is, which is an important figure. We are able to graduate before and after the year 2000. So this I'm gonna skip. It is a different way of plotting the duration. And then again, there is a very large literature exploiting the importance of institution. Here to give you a flavor of this, we have plotted based on this paper just a scatter plot, and you can see that as the institutional equality index goes up, the procyclicality falls. So also in the bank, we took this more seriously and put here institutional variables, and we also include the Fiscal rule that we had to instrument because there can be a two-way causality, and all the and all the results that we expected hold. So just I just have two more slides. So okay. So this is all the body that we believe in, at least many of us, and there are hundreds of papers replicate on. So to escape the to escape the figure trap, you can have a figure rule based on actually primary deficit, like the Eurozone you state. You can have a figure rule based on a structural primary deficit, like in Chile and Uruguay, and you can have other rules to name one, the el limit on public spending in Brazil. So even though if you look at the fund database, they will put these two completely different rules in the same bin. That makes no sense, because if you think for 1 second, a worse rule is this one, because if you are in bad times and your tax revenues fall by 10, you have to reduce by 10. So the correlation is by construction plus 1. So very very bad idea, and the best rule is the one that Chile implemented in the year 2005, in the year 2000, and that Uruguay has also recently has recently implemented. So I'm gonna skip this, the Chilean recipe. So just conclusions. I mean, if you ask me and many people that have contributed to this literature, and you know, when I had the 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 fortune of being the chief economist at the bank, you know, I mean, you would talk to a finance minister, a president of central bank, and they themselves would tell you that the main macro problem, right? I'm not talking about fiscal micro things, that is another topic, but the main macro fiscal problem confronted by emerging markets, particularly in the region in the last 60 years, is this pro cyclical fiscal policy. And just to finish, you know, I would like to leave you with a cautionary tale, and to all the people that are now working on fiscal rule, that is clearly kind of the next step. You know, my reason is that I mean, of course, fiscal rules are very helpful, because at least they tie your hands to some extent. But my conclusion, based on theory, based on practice, based on just talking to top policymakers, is that if you don't have the political will to take care of this issue of procyclicality, you may put in the books like 10 rules. It is not going to to work if the political will is not truly in place. So thank you.
So thank you, Carlos, for this very enlightening lecture. I don't know if there are questions in the audience. Cecilia, Hernan, Carlos.
Thank you. Indeed, that was a very interesting lecture. I saw that there was a Chilean recipe slide that you skipped. Can you elaborate on how the structural primary deficit is calculated and the rule that you recommended?
Carlos,
Yeah,
let me
sure.
collect a few questions and then I'll give the word to you back.
Sorry?
Let me collect the 3 questions for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay, sure.
Thank you. So briefly, first thing, the level of debt as a restriction on expansionary policy in recessions, fiscal rules based on debt anchors and debt maximums as optimal fiscal rules, and inside and outside lags on the correlations that you estimate for government expenditure. And finally, is procyclical fiscal policy as critical as you point out when you have small open economies with flexible exchange rates where fiscal policy doesn't seem to be quite so effective?
Right, yeah, okay.
There's one more, Carlos, and I'll pass it on to you.
Sure.
Hi, Carlos. Thanks for your talk. This is Carlos Urrutia. So my question is, how do you connect these recommendations about fiscal rule with your model with imperfect access to capital market, with incomplete markets, in the sense that since the way you pin down the fiscal policy there was already the Ramsey problem, how could a fiscal rule actually help if the main distortion is actually given by something structural in the economy, which is market incompleteness? So would imposing in that model a fiscal rule will actually worsen the social welfare since you are already computing the Ramsey policy and it turns out to be procyclical?
Yeah. Yeah, so let me just...
So on to you, Carlos.
Yes, yeah, so thank you so much for all these questions. So on Chile, what Chile does and has been doing since the year 2000 is to have a committee of independent experts, and then basically take the primary balance and adjust that by the business cycle and by the price of copper. In the case of Uruguay, right now we only adjust for the business cycle because our price of soybeans, even though it is high, it doesn't rise to how important it is in Chile. So this is a CENI that has tried to do this time series. I mean, I have not, I have to confess, but to any applied econometrician that has tried to control for this, for that, these are very difficult calculations to be able to get them right. And to the point that particularly in the bank, when I was there, there was, to my surprise, a little bit a lot of resistance to go to a structural fiscal rule on the basis, it's too complicated. How do you control for the business cycle? How do you control for copper? And my answer has been, yeah, I mean, of course it is complicated, but it is much better than if you are, if than if blinding blindly, right? And I think that the experience of Chile in the last 20 years has shown that if you have the expertise, the committee I think is 20 top Chilean economists, that, I mean, I am sure that you won't get it completely right, but that is much better than not even trying to do that computation, right? So that is Chile. On the that, yeah, I mean, I didn't have time to talk about that, but yeah, I mean, there are rules, as you know, that have a debt limit component. Now here, I think it's very important to make advances in the theory and also in empirics to be very clear that the fiscal procyclicality, I mean, and this is an issue that I emphasize a lot the day before yesterday when the World Bank presented a fiscal report. That you have to distinguish that if all that you have is an issue of fiscal procyclicality, I mean, your path is that is sustainable. I mean, because all that you're doing is spending on the wrong period, right? But if you spend 100 on the wrong period, but then you save 100 on the other period, that is gonna be bad in the sense that, this phenomenon that we call with Graciela, when it rains it pours, is gonna be there, but your path is gonna be that sustainable. So here the trick is to write a model that has friction that leads to procyclicality of fiscal policy, and then has an additional friction that may make your path unsustainable from a debt sustainability point of view. Okay, let me see. Sorry, I think I missed the last two. If you can remind me, correct.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we have much time, but I just wanted to, if you can say something about the inside and outside lags of fiscal policy when estimating the correlations between
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah. So that, is a very good question because there has not been there has not been a lot of work on that. People have, used lagged variables and forecasting variables in some sense. And to be frank, I think that is an issue that is worth investigating more because what I have seen, you cannot tell, what is the true difference that may entail. And also recall that many people use annual frequency and some people use a quarterly frequency. So that is also important. And another important thing is what filter do you use. So to me this has not been is settled, and your points are very well taken, and I am looking forward to a paper that could really do this and compare how does it change, if anything, when you look at the contemporaneous analysis, which is what the literature has done compared to a more, let's call it, dynamic as structure, yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. I think
Sure.
our time is done here. Thank you for your lecture, and we hope all our invitees will continue with their journey. Thank you, and one more time,
No,
congratulations on the award.
thank you so much for the invitation, and we will be in touch. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
Everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you.